Did parenting in 2025 feel, well, intense to you? If it did, you were definitely not alone. It was a year that was really defined by some new pressures for sure, but also by some incredible innovation and response. So today, we're going to do a little year in review, breaking down the biggest challenges parents faced, especially those raising children with unique needs, and more importantly, the encouraging trends that are pointing us toward a better path forward. You know, it all starts with a feeling, doesn't it? And that feeling was captured perfectly by this one mom who was just trying to plan a family trip to Disney. The frantic pre-dawn bookings, the lightning lane passes, scheduling every single minute of the day, it all made her realize something bigger. That feeling of being totally overwhelmed, it's kind of become the new normal for parents. So, here's how we're going to walk through this. First, we're going to put a name to this new intensity. Then, we'll dive into the digital world and all the unique stress that comes with it. After that, we'll look at the search for real solutions. And finally, we'll wrap up with an encouraging look at where we can go from here. Okay, let's start with that feeling of being constantly on, constantly overwhelmed. It actually has a name, one that researchers in 2025 spent a lot of time digging into. They call it the invisible load of modern family life. And this is where it gets really interesting. Research from Wake Forest University actually breaks this load down into 3 different parts. First, you've got the managerial load. That's all the planning and scheduling. Then there's the cognitive load, remembering everything from doctor's appointments to library books. And finally, the emotional load, the constant worrying. And for so many families, this also means coordinating therapies, navigating the whole world of IEPs, and managing really complex medical info. So who's carrying all this weight? Well, that really depends on who you ask. When researchers talked to women, they said they carry about 80% of this invisible load. But when they asked men, they saw the split as being much closer to 50-50. And that gap, that huge difference in perception, is a massive part of this story. And look, this intensity isn't just in our heads. You can see it in how the world itself has changed. Think back a generation. Kids had way less supervision online, but so much more freedom outdoors. They played stickball in the park. Now it's all about high-stakes travel teams. Walking to the store used to be a childhood rite of passage. Now it can actually lead to accusations of neglect. It's a whole different ballgame. But here is some genuinely encouraging news. While the load has definitely gotten heavier, more people are helping to carry it. Back in 1965, dads spent, on average, just 16 minutes a day on parenting tasks. Today, that number has skyrocketed to nearly an hour every day. That is a huge, positive shift. All right, on to our second section. You really can't talk about modern parenting without talking about technology. For so many of us, this is the brand new frontier of parental concern. Let's just start with one number that really sets the stage. 7 hours. In 2025, that was the average daily screen time for a child. That sheer amount of time is the backdrop for a whole new set of worries, from tech addiction to mental health challenges. And in 2025, a brand new threat just exploded into the mainstream: deepfakes. The crazy fast rise of generative AI meant that suddenly creating these hyper-realistic but completely fake images, videos, and even audio clips became easier than ever. And the scale of this is just staggering. I mean, look at this. In 2023, there were about 500,000 deepfakes shared online. The projection for 2025? 8 million. That kind of exponential growth is exactly what makes this such a major issue for parents to try and get a handle on. So why is this such a big deal for kids specifically? Well, research from the European Parliament found that because children's brains are still developing, they're way more likely to be fooled by this stuff. And this vulnerability can be even greater for kids with developmental differences, who might process information in a way that makes it even tougher to tell what's real and what's fake. Just think about that for a second. Can your child spot one? Heck, can you spot one? Because the studies show that for the average adult, spotting a deepfake is basically a coin toss, a 50-50 shot. Now just imagine being a kid trying to figure all that out. Okay, so that is a lot of challenges, I know. But the really encouraging part of the story from 2025 is how society started to respond. And that brings us to our third section, the search for solutions. You know, this wasn't just a conversation happening between parents anymore. It was happening in the halls of Congress. In 2025, lawmakers really pushed forward a whole wave of new legislation aimed specifically at creating some guardrails for kids in the digital world. But as we all know, progress isn't always a straight line. The Kids Online Safety Act, or KOSA, has been on a long journey. It actually passed the Senate, but then stalled in the House and had to be reintroduced again in 2025. It just goes to show you the persistence behind trying to find a real legislative answer. Of course, it's not simple. On one hand, KOSA wants to create a duty of care for tech platforms and give parents more control. Supporters say this is about holding big tech accountable. But on the other hand, critics have raised some really valid concerns about potential censorship for teens and how some of the vague definitions in the bill could be misused. It's a really complex debate. And the search for solutions in 2025 went way beyond just the digital world. There was this growing recognition that the invisible load gets a lot heavier because of real-world pressures. Everything from the financial squeeze to the lack of good childcare and what are called childcare deserts. And that challenge is even harder for parents who are looking for specialized care. Now, on the financial side, there was some actual, concrete progress. New tax laws in 2025 offered some real relief, like a new deduction for car loan interest and expanded eligibility for health savings accounts. The law also made it easier for families in tribal communities to access the adoption tax credit for kids with special needs, which is a really critical piece of support. So, with all that in mind, where does that leave us? Well, our final section is all about charting an encouraging path forward for parents. So, what are the big takeaways here? First, that feeling of parental intensity is a real shared thing. You are not going crazy and you are not alone. Second, all this awareness about digital dangers is actually driving real legislative action. Third, critical support systems for families are finally part of the national conversation. And fourth, dads are more involved than ever. These are all signs of real positive change. Which really leaves us with one final big question to think about. We've put a name to the invisible load, and we've seen how it's affecting all of us. The real question for the future is, how can we work together, both in our own homes and as a society, to share that load more fairly for the next generation? We know that for so many families, especially those raising children with special needs, the challenges we've talked about today have extra layers of complexity. If that sounds like you and you're looking for more specialized information and resources to help manage that load, there's a dedicated service called Stella the Special Needs Concierge. It's available 24/7 at askstellanow.org. Thanks so much for joining us.